Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tony Pruitt Show. And today we have a very special guest. Among many things, today's guest is one of my favorite all-time 70s childhood actors. In fact, we still watch her every night before we go to bed. Unless the stinking House on the Prairie is on, which really ticks me off, by the way. And she is one of the stars of the Waltons who played Mary Ellen. She is not only an actress, but she is a singer, writer, producer, and director. Please welcome the very talented Miss Judy Norton. How you doing, my friend?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Let's get started. Okay, I think you were about 13 when you got on with the Waltons. Is that correct?
Right. When we did the Homecoming, which ended up originally was meant to just be a TV Christmas special, and then it ended up being the pilot for the Waltons. So I was 13 when I did the Homecoming. So by the time the series started about 6 months later, I was 14. Ripe old age 14.
Ripe old age. Do you remember when you got the call that you were going to be on the Waltons?
Well, with the Homecoming, we'd been cast for the Homecoming. And so I remember that because it was very unusual. Typically when you audition, you go in, you have your own opinion about whether you thought it went well, it didn't go well, what the sort of vibe in the room was, if you felt like they liked you. And so sometimes I wasn't surprised when I got a call I was cast, and sometimes I was disappointed because I thought I would be. And sometimes I was like, I am so not getting that role. In this case, they had, for me, I went in 3 times, and all 3 times I went in, they put all of the children together. So there were 7 of us. They may or may not have had, because Richard Thomas, I think, was already cast as John Boy, so he wasn't there. So they may have had somebody else read that, but 6 of us for sure were in there, and they had us read together the scene where we were cracking walnuts in the barn early on. And so I did that a couple times. I did that audition, then I was called back, and we did that audition, the same scene. And I don't remember if any of the people I'd originally auditioned with were in this callback or not. So I did that. And then I was called in a 3rd time. And the 3rd time I came in, there were only 6 of us, 1 for each of the roles. And they brought us into the room, and Earl Hamner was in the room. Our producer was in the room, Bob Jacks, Fielder Cook, who was the director, the casting director, Pam Palafroni. I'm not sure who else was in the room. And they brought us all in together, and they basically said, I think they wanted to see us together or something. And they just said, you are the cast that we would like to have do the show. So that never happened. You never get cast in the room.
Wow.
So I was like, oh, wow. But you kind of want to hear it officially. So then when my agent called and confirmed it, it was not a complete surprise, but it was very exciting to hear that in the room. So we filmed the Homecoming. In the last week of filming, we were up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, shooting all of the exteriors with the snow, because we don't get a lot of snow in Southern California, especially not in the Los Angeles area. Has happened once or twice. And during that week, we started hearing rumors about the producers potentially doing it as a series. And
wow.
So we were within a month or so after, I think sometime around the beginning of 72, which was the year the series started, they went into contract negotiations, and they just basically asked all of the children to continue on to the series. So there was no more audition process for that. It was strictly, coming to terms on the contract. And so we were put on hold pretty quickly. I think they wanted to make sure we were going to be available. So within a few months, they put us on hold. Then they negotiated contracts, and we went into production, I think in June of 1972 for the fall season.
It's amazing that you remember that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I don't remember, but that was pretty significant.
Well, looking back at filming the Waltons, did you enjoy doing that? Did you enjoy yourself? And about how many hours a week did you work doing this?
Most of the time, I absolutely loved it. Any job that you do for a long time, there's times when it gets to be like a job. It's a regular job. I mean, fortunately, the people, the cast we were always really close. We'd already really bonded during the homecoming, the kids. And then we quickly, made that adjustment to having Michael Learned and Ralph Waite and Will Geer come in and play the parents and the grandfather. So they were a wonderful addition. We got along great. So that, particularly for the kids, we were super close and just hung out together. So I think that made it easier during the long, tedious days. And we would film 5 days a week. We had weekends off. And until we turned 18, we were limited in how many hours a day we could be there. We could only work for 8 hours, and then you'd add on an hour for lunch. So our time was, we were basically doing an 8-hour day, like
wow,
grown-ups. We had our weekends off. We had occasional breaks during the year. Sometimes, we had a week or two at Christmas. Sometimes we'd get 4 days at Thanksgiving. And then there might be some other point where we got a few days, but we were playing catch up all the time because we started filming in end of May, beginning of June, usually for a September air date for the season. And because we took 6.5 days to shoot one episode. So you do the math. I mean, if you're shooting 5 days a week, you're not completing an episode every week.
Sure.
So our first episode, maybe we're June, July, August, 4 months ahead in the first one. But as you keep adding a day and a half and a day and a half and a day and a half, you start losing weeks over the course of 24 to 26 episodes. So towards the end of the season, we would finish up sometime around February, I think, February, March. And so maybe they'd have a month for post-production, plus we'd take in some time at Christmas and some time at Thanksgiving.
Right.
So it was a full 9 months out of the year that we filmed.
Wow.
So it was pretty intense.
That you've answered. My next question was, y'all actually seemed to be a close-knit family. Mm-hmm. Was that really acting, or were y'all really that close?
No, we really were. And what I remember is that we were like real siblings and even like a real family. There were times where I could be completely annoyed with somebody, and I'm not speaking to you. You're just irritating me. But it was never anything more than you might feel with your own siblings. There was never any question of, I don't love you. We aren't family. It was just, right now, I'm over you.
Yeah,
and that would last for however long it lasted. But there was always this bond that we were family.
I mean, you could tell. Here's a question from one of your fans. While you're on set, is it hard not to call your cast member by their real name versus their character name? And does that ever happen? Did anybody ever mess up doing that?
I think it maybe happened occasionally, but as an actor, you get really adept at popping in and out of character and real life. So as soon as the cameras were rolling, we just kind of switched gears. I know people will hear stories of actors who are very method and that just they hold that character on and off, from the time they arrive on the set, they are in character the whole time. There wasn't anybody on our show who was like that. I think some of the actors, Ralph Waite maybe came a bit more from that school, but that just meant that when he was doing the work, he worked his own process, as we all did. But I think, it was never a question of not knowing who we were in real life, as opposed to, sometimes the crew would, half the time they'd call us by our real names, half the time they'd call us by our character names. I remember reading something about one of our directors, Ralph Sininsky, who directed quite a few episodes of the Waltons, and he has a blog that he does about all of the television that he directed all through the 70s. And so I was reading some of his blogs about episodes, and he was talking about his very first episode that he directed. And he was talking about being familiar with the cast, and he knew who Richard Thomas was and this and that. He said, but then you got to all these children and who was playing which role and stuff like that. So he said one day he had some prep time. He said, rather than spending the time prepping things for the scene, he said, I spent that time learning their names, which I thought was really sweet that, that he wanted to do that. And they would sometimes, and we got used to that too. I mean, when you're doing any kind of a show, whether it's a, TV, or I've done a lot of stage, you get used to people calling you by your cast name, calling you by your real name, calling you by the wrong name. It just happens in your own family where, my mom would call me by my sister's name or something. Sure. So you just do it. And I think there may have been times where somebody called another cast member by their real name. And I've heard viewers say, oh, I think there was that scene where so-and-so called Mary by her real name. And, who knows?
It happens.
Yeah. It wasn't a big thing to go, oh my goodness, I got to remember what to call these people.
I hear you. Well, don't you agree that Will Greer played the perfect grandpa?
Yeah, he really did. And I have heard it said from people who knew a lot of his career and also knew him that this character was the most like he was in real life.
Really?
I mean, I didn't see, he did a ton of work that I wasn't aware of because I was so young and he'd had such a long career before I knew him. But there wasn't a real visible transition from him in real life to him in character. I think that was true with most of us because there was a lot of us in those characters.
Right.
We weren't exactly the same, but it was pretty easy you brought a lot of yourself to it, and the producers allowed a lot of that to shape how the characters grew. So Will, I think they incorporated a lot of his background. He had a degree in botany.
I knew that.
He was very familiar with all the plants. Evidently, he planted that garden, the Walton garden, on the back lot of the studio and tended it. And, a lot of the times in scenes, you would hear him talking about the trees and about nature, and he was always sort of educating someone. Sometimes I think they let him riff, and sometimes I think they just started writing in more things like that because of his knowledge and his love of that.
He was incredible. He was great.
Yeah.
I loved him.
Yeah.
Do you still stay in touch with the cast of the Waltons?
Yes. I mean, I don't talk with all of them regularly, but I'm talking with somebody fairly regularly, and there's different things that we'll be doing different, like a lot of the cast is going to some sort of a celebrity, like an autograph gathering show thing, the beginning of October. I'm not able to make it, but there's been a lot of email and Facebook threads about that and things that are what pictures are we taking? What are we doing? And so we get those types of things. Some of us are going to do a tour in Canada next year. So there's been a lot of Zoom calls in the coordination of that.
Cool.
So those things happen. I've been back and forth with Richard Thomas recently because I'm going to go catch his tour. He's on tour with To Kill a Mockingbird. So we've been coordinating where and when I can do that, or he'll contact me and ask. He just contacted me the other day and asked me about some email he'd gotten about something. It's like, have you heard of this person? What's the deal? And I'm like, oh, this is the deal on that. You would have met this person here and here. And, so we do that. That's,
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really. This is my question. How big was that movie set? Because it looks huge on TV with the farm, the house, the town, the lakes, etc. How big is the actual movie set?
Well, it was all of that was on the back lot of Warner Brothers Studios. So that section of the back lot was a decent size. It was kind of like, I'd say, the length of a short main street in a small town, but the things were scattered and they weren't in the proximity that you might envision as an audience. Like the house was just a facade. The only things inside that structure were a room that came off the back porch. As you went in the back porch, there was a room in there that we used for our makeup room when we were on the back lot. If you went in the front, there were stairs that went up just a little bit and disappeared because they didn't really go anywhere. And then there was a little bit of, you could go upstairs, you could climb a ladder to get upstairs to the windows in the second story. So you could see John Boy in his window, or sometimes when you could literally see from the exterior of the house that we were in the window, as opposed to just a close-up, which might have been done on the soundstage. But there was no back to the house. Just those closed in rooms that needed to be. And beyond that, there was nothing back there. And you never saw us go behind the house. If you think about it, we were always over by the barn. The barn was real. It was a real structure. We filmed inside there, and the smokehouse was just past that. And the chicken coop was where the chicken coop was. And then when they built the new mill, it was off to the other side of the yard, but you often saw that together in one shot where you could see someone walk from the mill to the house or from the house to the mill. So those proximities and the front yard with the teeter-totter, that was all part of a decent size spread. Now, if you went from the front of the house and went around a corner, literally right there was Ike Godsey's store. Again, just a facade. There was no,
there was no store.
There was no store there. That was on the interior of the store, was on the soundstage.
Wow.
So that was like, you never saw the side of Godsey's because there was nothing. You could go inside. They had some sort of a flat there just so you couldn't see through to the trees behind, but that was it. But you always had the sense that you were the better part of a mile or something, 3/4 of a mile or so to go to Godsey's store.
Right.
But we were literally like 100, 200 yards.
That's crazy.
To there. And you often saw, I thought it was interesting that we didn't always take the same routes. Sometimes you see people approach Godsey's store from one path. Sometimes you see them come from another path. Sometimes we leave the house going one direction and then we leave it going. So they didn't really map that out. If you continued past where Godsey's store was, you got into what we called the jungle area. And that's where Drusilla's pond was, which was a man-made pond on the back lot. They could drain it. And when we weren't filming, they would drain it. We weren't the only show filming there that used that pond. You would see it on other shows sometimes that were filmed.
Really?
Others. Yeah. Dukes of Hazzard shot there. So sometimes you might have seen those same jungle roads in Drusilla's pond in an episode of Dukes of Hazzard. They used to drive there generally through our front yard sometimes just for fun.
That is so cool.
Hi boys, how you doing? So the pond was there. And then a lot of times if you just saw us kind of on walking along roads, dirt roads, or driving along dirt roads, those would have been those handful of short jungle roads. And they just set up the camera in multiple places and do that, a couple of times with horse races. Parts of those were filmed on the back lot. If you continued past the jungle, past Drusilla's pond, you would get to Western Street. And right at the edge of Western Street we had two different buildings that were used for the church over the seasons. When you saw the smaller church in later seasons, that was right there at the beginning of Western Street. That, I don't think there might have been some sort of space inside there, but I don't think that we shot any of the interiors of the church actually there. And then you had just different aspects of Western Street, like anytime you saw somebody coming or going from the bus depot, or you saw the sheriff's office, all of those were sort of on Western Street.
I got you.
So just different things like that. Then if you left the back lot and you headed towards where the sound stages were, you'd go through some different sections. There was sort of an old kind of village, Mexican village kind of set where a number of things were shot. I had thought someone said they shot the shootout for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid there, but I looked on some information stuff and it didn't sound like that's where they shot it. So I think I got someplace that information is wrong. But we continued into Midwest Street, which was where the gazebo was. Anytime you saw Center Square and you saw a gazebo, that was also where the schoolhouse was, which sometimes doubled as the church. When you saw a bigger church, that was the same building. It was right across from the gazebo, but you didn't always see that. Where they set the camera would give you a different perspective.
Very interesting.
Around that gazebo were a number of sort of different storefront type things that would get used when we went to Charlottesville, or John Boy went to Boatwright University, where the school was for Boatwright University, or where I went to nursing school, or when they went to the courthouse. That was all things that surrounded that gazebo. And then there was also a street off of it where Kurt and Mary Ellen's, like the doctor's office was, and where things like the Pendleton house, when Jenny Pendleton was, came back to town, or so those different houses along there would get used. I think Mrs. Brimmer's boarding house, a facade, the front, and some of those had interiors that you could shoot some stuff in around that square, but I don't necessarily remember which ones we could actually use interiors on. But most of our interiors we did on sound stages. Stage 26 was our primary location. That's where all the interior of the house, the Walton house, living room, kitchen, everything on one floor, given the illusion that you had two floors. So you had the kitchen, the living room, the front stairs, and then off next to where Grandma and Grandpa's room was, all kind of connected. And then you went up pretend stairs that kind of went around a corner into just a little tiny holding space where we'd all cram together. If we had to run up the stairs or we'd all like cram there together and come running down the stairs. And then there was another section on the soundstage that had the bedrooms, John Boy's room, the boys' room, the parents' room doubled as the girls' room. So they just change out the furniture depending on what they were shooting. They didn't actually have 4 bedrooms. And then they had the little attic area. They dug a hole in the soundstage to go. So if you were coming in the upstairs and you saw somebody going up or down those stairs, that had been dug out. So there were stairs and it just went down to like a dirt area. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, and interior Godsy's store was on that stage, and the interior of the Baldwin sisters, just their main parlor room and their front entryway. Those were pretty much permanent sets that were all on the soundstage. Any other sets that we needed were usually a different soundstage just across the way. They'd rent another soundstage and put up extra sets as needed in episodes. So that's
very interesting. That is so cool.
Geography, yeah.
Well, I've been told that the table scenes took a long time to film. Is this correct? Where you're sitting around having a meal.
Yeah. What was long about it was that if we were in the kitchen, they'd shoot everything, all the eating scenes, like back to back, because we were in that set. So we did not shoot in order of a script, because if you're in the kitchen and the next scene's on the front porch, you're not going to pack up all your equipment and go and truck it all out to the back lot to do a scene on the porch where John Boy leaves the house, and then truck it all back in. So we would shoot, it's more efficient time and money wise to say, okay, we're in the kitchen. Everything in the kitchen is going to get shot right now. So that's what would make it long and grueling, was because we were in that set. And usually most of us were there around the kitchen table. It would get hot because the lights were on. We'd be like, we weren't necessarily good. It was just, you'd lose your energy. It's like the air got sucked out of that set. And a lot of times they'd make us wait, because if they let us go, it was hard to gather us back up.
I bet it was.
So they'd kind of go, well, just stay here. We're going to be ready in a minute. Just sit there. We're almost ready. And we'd be trying to keep our energy up. So we'd start talking and making noise, and then they'd get mad at us because they were trying to work and we're trying to keep our energy up. And so it was. And then you had this food. that they kept serving us. And, you're like, I don't want to look at this food anymore.
Yeah, man. Well, here's a question it's going to be stupid, I know, but I'm just curious. Do you remember the episode where you found out that Kurt was still alive?
Yeah.
And you used a different Kurt.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Do you know why they did that?
I don't know if do you know that I have a YouTube channel?
Yes, but I haven't seen that particular episode.
Okay. So what I did was recently, a couple months ago, I was able to get Tom Bauer, who played the original Kurt. He came on as a guest. And so I just said,
really?
okay. I asked him, I said, what happened? So he told it's actually kind of a funny story. I mean, it is now. At the time, he can laugh about it now because he works all the time. But
right.
He said in the season where they killed off Kurt the first time at Pearl Harbor, he said that season, he said his agent had asked on his behalf for a very nominal raise, and so he said, so they killed me off.
Really?
that was his response. Like I guess it sounded like there wasn't even really much of a negotiation. It's like, no, forget it. Whether
You're
they
out of
wanted
here.
to make an example, whether the agent was trying to hold firm on his behalf, who knows? But he said next thing he knows, he hears that they're going to kill him off. So he said,
very interesting.
Yeah, when they decided to do that episode, they did approach him. They called his agent, and he said his agent asked for the same nominal raise, and they recast him.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, now we know.
Yeah,
okay.
they played hardball, man.
They sure did. Okay, you mentioned your YouTube channel, Behind the Scenes. When did you, this is a must for any fan of the Waltons. I don't know how many episodes you've done. You might have done every one. There's a ton of them.
There's like 220 something episodes, and I have not done that many.
But there's a lot out there.
Yeah.
What made you do this?
It was during the beginning of the COVID shutdown. And so different projects that were in the works for me, got put on hold, and nobody, of course, knew how long things would be on hold. And so I started picking up other sorts of projects, things that I could do during the shutdown. And so I was taking some workshops and, and different sorts of online training things, and I thought, well, I want to learn a little bit more about maybe marketing and stuff like that, and social media. Cause I thought, well, I can get more active on my social media, because usually I just don't have time for it. It's not that I don't love everybody and wouldn't like to interact with people all the time, but there just aren't enough hours in the day. So I started being on my Facebook a bit more. And then I was learning more about some of the social media platforms, and something I watched was talking about using YouTube. And I happened to see that Cammie Kotler, who played Elizabeth, she had done 5 or 6 segments talking about the very first episode we filmed. And she did a slightly different take on how she did it. But I thought, well, this is really clever, and people seem to be really loving it. And I thought, well, I can do that. I can talk about my experiences on the show. So I started it up and thought it would be a nice way to interact with the longtime viewers and people. We have a wonderful fan base, and people that, here we are 50 years later, and people just still embrace the show. And we have new people, new generations, kids getting to know the show, grandkids getting to know the show. So I just thought, as a gesture during COVID, to try and interact with people and share something I could share with people. So I started it there, and kind of went from there.
I thoroughly enjoy it.
Thank
so
you.
If you're a fan of the Waltons, you got to check this out. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Do you have a favorite episode of the Waltons?
I don't know that I have a single favorite. There's different episodes I like for different reasons. Some of my top favorites, I would say, the Easter story from season 1, when Mama got polio. I really enjoyed that episode. Everybody was very engaged. Everybody had a storyline. I always had a lot of fun with my early storylines with like GW and the baseball. And then, I'm going to go to the dance and I have to teach them to dance. And so I just thought it was a really sweet episode. I love the Firestorm, which was about the book burning, just because it's so incredibly powerful. And I thought John Ritter and Richard Thomas did such beautiful work, and Mrs. Brimmer, then Nora Marlowe, with the whole reading the German Bible. I just thought it was just such an impactful.
It was.
Yeah. So that's in my top. The Thanksgiving story, I think, is really sweet when John Boy has his injury, and it's getting to be Thanksgiving. The Best Christmas, when Mama wants to get everybody back together for Christmas and everybody is all over the place, and Mrs. and Franny Tatum crashes her car into the lake, and the church tree goes through, and nobody can quite get back there because everybody is just engaged in other things, helping people, or, it just, I thought, had such a wonderful sense of community. So those are ones that stand out. But as I've been watching more episodes, I keep going, oh, I love this episode. It's because some of these episodes, I think what people don't realize is that in the 70s, we didn't have ways of recording shows. So, and they didn't screen the episodes for us. We were too busy working. So if I wasn't home on a Thursday night at 8:00 to watch the show, I didn't see it. So there were a lot of episodes I didn't see. And then it was years before it was on in reruns, and then I might not have been available. And so there's episodes I maybe saw once 40 to 50 years ago.
Wow. And
some I may never have seen. And if I wasn't in a scene, I wasn't there when it was being filmed. So there's I watch episodes sometimes and I'm like, I don't know this. Or sometimes I watch things that I'm in and I'm like, I don't remember filming that.
That's funny.
So I'm really enjoying going back and looking at these episodes myself. And every time I watch another one, I'm like, that's a great episode. I love that.
Oh, they're great. Okay, getting off of the Waltons for a minute.
Okay.
I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm running a little late. I don't like that, but I got a couple questions.
Sure, no problem.
You must be a thrill seeker. I read somewhere where you hold a record for skydiving. Did I read that correctly?
You did. I was involved in 2 world records that were set in skydiving.
You must be out of your mind.
Well, I originally started skydiving for a segment of Circus of the Stars. They asked me to do a stunt that involved wing walking and skydiving. Oh, so they Lord. Trained me to do both of those things. And I mean, it was really scary in the beginning. I was like, oh my goodness, I just thought, I just want to finish this and hopefully live through it. And yes. That'll be it. But someplace along the line in my month of training to do that, I got hooked. And when I stopped, when I felt like more confident about what I was doing, felt like I had control in the air and was able to shift the kind of gear I was wearing. So, because initially the harness I was wearing didn't fit me well. And so every time my parachute opened, I got bruised and injured, openings are really, can have a lot of impact. And my landings were really hard. I was using a big old round parachute, old gear, because this was in the 80s. So then I switched to, at that point, more modern technology, which is the same basically that they use now, the sort of rectangular, what we call squares. And it fit better and it opened easier and the landing was easier. So when I stopped getting hurt all the time, I started having fun. And then they couldn't shoot the segment because of weather conditions. So they said, well, we'll do it next year. So I kept jumping because I was having fun. And so ended up with about, 700 jumps, and someplace along the line.
700
I jumped for about 10 years until I was pregnant with my son. And then I stopped. But somewhere along the line, I was invited to participate in 2 world records. One was all women. We put 60 women together in the air. out of 3 planes flying in formation. And then
Wow.
I did one that was a combined men and women that was 120 out of a C-130 prop, big military with, the drop down tailgate, and we all, 120 people out the back end.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Both of them have been broken, but it's exciting to have
Hey,
to have
exactly.
done that. And it's interesting because you're doing something and the organizers are always like, can you do this? I was one of the least experienced people on it. I just hadn't been jumping as long, but I'd had a lot of opportunities. So I was good. But they're like, can you guarantee that? I'm like, how can anybody guarantee? Nobody's ever done this before. How can you guarantee you can do something you've never done? But,
Exactly.
and people were getting kicked off all the time. If you made a mistake, you were kicked off. And there were people like circling, waiting to take those places. So I was like, please just don't let me get kicked off.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, good for you. Well, tell me about your love of horses and horseback riding.
Oh, it's still one of the hobbies that I still do. That's where I was this morning before I came here, which is
Good.
I ride, 4 or 5 days a week. I jump horses still. And
Thrill seeker. See, that's what I'm saying. You're a thrill seeker.
sports have always been my hobbies. I like to stay in shape. I like to stay active, but I hate straight up exercising,
Mhm.
where I'm aware the whole time that I'm exercising. So I've never been one to go to the gym or, I'm just not consistent about that. So if I'm out playing tennis or jumping horses or, water skiing or snow skiing or all the things that I did over the years, then, I was having a good time, but I was getting exercise, and that was fun for me. And because I did a lot of sports, I always said I was better than average at a few things, but not fabulous at anything.
That's okay. Hey.
But, it was kind of, I didn't have the
Absolutely.
time I never focused just on one sport. So I tended to stick with the ones that I had some aptitude for, and, a couple world
Sure.
records to show for it. So there you go. Couldn't have been
I think
too bad.
I think that's awesome. Well, you've done a lot of things in your career. What are you most proud of?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, the Waltons, of course, is the cornerstone to that, because here we are. I remember having a conversation with Richard Thomas one time, a number of years back. I went to see a show of his, and we were talking afterwards. And, I said, the wonderful thing about doing a show like this that has had the longevity that it has, that of course, none of us had any clue would happen, is that no matter what I did after that, I never felt like I had to justify being an actor.
Right.
I know so many actors who are so talented, but they never had that opportunity.
Mhm.
And so they always feel like they have to explain and justify being an actor, because people don't realize how difficult it is, and how much of the time you spend not working as an actor. So to have that gift for 9 years of working 9 months out of the year, I mean, when you get into freelancing, you're like, you have way too much time
Yeah.
off. I spend a lot of time in development or trying to put things together, or, but,
Right.
things people say we're going to do. But, I said, if I had a nickel for everything somebody hired me for that never happened, I could have retired.
Absolutely. Well, I know
So that's definitely, but then, a lot of the things that I kind of branched into, because I felt like I had to keep expanding my sort of toolkit. So I got into writing and directing, some producing. I always loved singing. I did musical theater as a child and wanted to do it after the Waltons. So, and then I got into doing concert work. So I think,
you've done it all.
I've done a lot of things, and I'm proud of most of it. There's some things we could, that I don't advertise. Well, there was that little show I could,
You're right.
we're not talking about that. So, you have some things like that. But I mean, I think the Waltons is something, if I'm going to be remembered for something forever, which is the thing that I will be, I'm just really glad that it's something I can be proud of.
I hear you. Well, I know you're a big fan of the theater. So my next question is, would you rather be in movies or would you rather be in the theater?
I love both, and they're different enough that I don't know that I can choose, because I love that with anything that's being filmed, because the camera is close, you have the opportunity to do more of your more internal work that just shows through your eyes and your expression, and you can keep it simple, and you also can do extra takes. But so I like that aspect of television, but television and film really belong more to the director and the editor and everybody who decides what your performance is after you're done.
Mhm.
So whereas on stage, it's really once you go through the rehearsal process and the curtain goes up, that is in the hands of the actors, and nobody can change what you did that night.
Right.
And that you really have to pull together as a team to make that show happen, whatever is going on, whatever errors that you have to ride through. And you can't go back and say, cut, let's do it again.
Yeah.
So I love that part of it, and the energy from having a live audience. So I think they both have wonderful things to offer. And I think as an actor, to be able to experience both of those is really special. I love doing musical theater. Musical theater is probably one of my favorites to do.
Musical theater. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you get nervous and get butterflies still?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's normal. That's normal.
Yeah. I mean, opening nights still, I think maybe less because I've been through the rehearsal process. I think I get the worst butterflies auditioning.
Really?
Yeah. Because once I've been hired, I figure the odds are pretty good that I'm going to stay hired. Yes, I could something could happen. I could get fired. It happens.
Sure.
But I have confidence because they decided they felt like I was a good choice. So I just trust that and go forward. When I go into audition, I don't know what the atmosphere is going to be like. It's not necessarily conducive to your best work because you're sitting around, you're waiting however long. You can't prepare the way you want to. If you're going to be in a scene, if I were going to be on camera or on stage, I could do whatever prep I needed right before. And, in an audition, you're like waiting and waiting and waiting. Then it's going to go in, then you're going to chit chat with people. And then they're going to go, okay, good, let's do it. And if it's a really big emotional scene, it's not, sometimes you can drop right into it. Sometimes you can't. And so sometimes I'll have and go, well, I didn't get there. But I knew if I was filming, I would. Or they go, okay, great. No, let's give it one more take. But they're only going to let you usually do it. Sometimes they'll ask you to do a second time. But if your first take wasn't good, a lot of times they're on to the next.
Really? It's a cutthroat business.
It is.
The last thing we do on our show is called the Fun Fast Five.
Oh, no. Okay.
And it's where we ask you 5 simple questions about yourself. And they're easy and they're fun and just kind of tells us about you. Are you ready to play?
Sure.
Do you have a favorite fast food place that you like to eat at?
I try to avoid fast food because it doesn't like me.
Okay, fair enough. Did you have a favorite TV show growing up other than the Waltons?
I don't remember. There were a lot of things I liked, but I don't know that there's like one single standout. Okay. Yeah. I know so far I'm not doing real good with these questions.
That's okay. Who are a few of your favorite singer entertainers you love to listen to, like somebody you're a fan of?
I would say, like, in terms of singers, love Frank Sinatra, Barbara Streisand, because of the whole musical theater and standards. My mom sang when I was growing up, so that was all the stuff I grew up listening to. So I love sort of the
classics.
40s, the classics, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Number 4, what is your favorite kind of music genre?
Musical theater is right up there. Musical theater, Great American Songbook. But I also love, I grew up in the 70s, so kind of all that classic rock. If I'm not in the mood for standards and that, then it's kind of, classic rock.
I love classic rock myself. Yeah. Last question. Do you prefer horror, drama, or comedy films?
Horror, definitely not. I'm not a horror fan. And then it depends on the mood I'm in. It depends on the kind of comedy. I'm really a little particular on that. So not all comedies, but I enjoy what would be for me a good comedy. Which is usually a little more subtle maybe than, I don't like over the top, blatant, in your face, toilet humor, sophomoric sort of stuff. That's not, but I like witty stuff and drama, but I don't like really stuff that's like too dark or too gruesome or too edgy, so I'm kind of, I don't know.
Okay. Those are some tough questions for you.
They are. I know.
I'm sorry I didn't have better questions for you.
My favorite color is blue.
There you go. I could have done that.
Yeah. I like the beach and the mountains.
That was going to be my other question. Do you prefer the beach or the mountains?
I like being near water. I don't, I think it would be hard for me to live someplace that was just completely landlocked, but I like mountains because I like to ski. So, I spent a lot of time in Canada, living up there and working up there. And I used to have to drive from Vancouver to Winnipeg 5 times a year. And when you got to the Canadian prairies and it was just flat for miles and miles and miles, I'd be like, I don't know about this.
Right. Absolutely.
Texas has got, you kind of, you don't have a lot of mountains around there, but you have lakes, some.
We have a little bit of everything in Texas. So, well, listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on our show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You're a wonderful guest, and I hope I didn't take up too much of your time.
Oh, not at all. I enjoyed it. As you can tell, I have no trouble rambling on any question.
Well, I appreciate you doing that. It's hard to interview those that don't want to talk or say anything at all. So I really appreciate your honesty. And for those of you watching our show, thank you for watching our show as always, and stay tuned for more legends. God bless.